Welcome to the Power of Design podcast, where we have inspiring conversations that explore the intersection of architecture, construction, and real estate, so we can understand the dynamics and trends that shape an exciting and powerful built environment. This is your host, Jack Osa. Today, we'll be talking to my friend, Henri Gresset. Henri is a broker at Childress Klein in Charlotte, North Carolina. He represents local developers and investors looking to develop adaptive reuse projects. I have known Henri for many years, and I admire his capacity to understand the market and the culture that makes his clients successful. We'll be talking about design, technology, traveling the world, and the future of the built environment. This is my conversation with Henri. Henri, welcome to the Power of Design podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing excellent. Thanks, Jack.
Henri, you are a broker, and over the past year, you have sourced over 250,000 square feet of off-market acquisitions, representing local developers and investors focused on adaptive reuse in Charlotte, North Carolina. How do you see the market today?
Sure. Well, by next month, we'll hit the record for the longest economic expansion in U.S. history. And it's certainly felt like a white-hot market in Charlotte for many years now. Everyone in real estate seems to be extremely busy. And the economists will say we're overdue for a market correction, but they've been saying that for years. And no doubt it will come, but Charlotte feels fairly well insulated and doing well by virtually all metrics. It's definitely a competitive landscape. As more and more outside investors and developers are looking to Charlotte to chase yields. But Charlotte has plenty of runway, and I'm extremely optimistic about Charlotte's future.
That's exciting. I'm also very excited about the opportunities we're going to have in the next coming years for us in this city. Henri, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up?
Sure. Well, my father is French. He grew up in the Alps in the region called the Jura. My mother is from Southside, Virginia. They met at business school in Tulane. My mom is an accountant. My dad is a banker, and we move frequently because of his work. And my parents live in South Park today, and that's where I grew up since 1998. My brother is a software developer in the Bay Area, and my sister is a foreign exchange currency trader, also in the Bay Area. And before moving to Charlotte, we lived in Europe for 7 years, and before then, we lived in Dallas and San Francisco. And I was born in San Francisco in 1986.
Tell me more about your time growing up in Europe.
Sure. Well, we lived in London for 2.5 years, and before then, we lived in Switzerland for 4.5 years. And living in Europe was great. I have lots of fond memories of weekend ski trips and visiting my French family. We took a lot of road trips to various places, although admittedly at the time I would have rather played video games or Legos with my friends on the weekends, rather than being in the back of a station wagon on 10-hour road trips. But, we made some really great memories and were able to experience and see some cool things at an early age.
Are there any particular memories that they're still with you today?
Well, my first day of kindergarten was particularly memorable. We lived in Zurich. And as my mom was driving me to school, she said, "Henri, this is how you say, I need to use the restroom in French." And I asked her, "Well, why do I need to know how to say that?" And she replied, "Well, they don't speak English here. Good luck." And that was that. So I had to learn to speak French pretty quickly if I wanted to make friends. And I think that helped me learn to adapt quickly to my environment, which I still use those skills today. So yeah, that was a particularly vivid memory.
That's interesting. I know you're a big traveler. What motivates you to travel?
Well, the desire to travel is hereditary, I guess you could say. Most of my family and extended family loves to travel. I come from French and American heritage. I've grown up with having multiple views on politics, art, food, and just different traditions. And many of my closest friends are from different countries, just like you, Jack.
That's right.
And my girlfriend is of Panamanian, Colombian, and American descent. I've always enjoyed meeting people from different cultures and walks of life. And traveling helps remind me that people's lives are mostly a matter of luck. And much of that luck is tied to geography. We have all the same basic goals. We all have the same core feelings. Maslow's hierarchy of needs are universal, and my hierarchy of needs are met with relative ease compared to what other people deal with on a day-to-day basis. Traveling serves as a reality check. It teaches me empathy and gratitude. One of the best parts of traveling is returning home. My thoughts when I get back to Charlotte Douglas are always, I am so lucky to live in Charlotte. And at the end of the day, I'm kind of a simple guy. What fuels me is there is a limited amount of time on this planet, and there is so much cool stuff to do, so many incredible things to see, and I want to see as much as I can. I want to share the best food and the best wine with my family and friends. That's really it. You know, the French call it la joie de vivre, literally translated to the joy of life. I really want to extract the most joy and fulfillment out of life possible, and travel is such an efficient way to find fulfillment. It teaches you so much so quickly. And it's often an overstimulation of the senses. It's, you know, oftentimes when you're in the moment, when you're traveling, you're not even enjoying yourself. You're outside of your comfort zone. But when you look back on those moments and marinate on the experiences you've had, there's a sense of fulfillment that you're making the most of your time on Earth. You're learning the most you can about the human condition.
I love that. You know, for me, being an immigrant, you know, I haven't traveled that much, but just putting yourself in a different context it really gives you a different perspective on things. You know, seeing people, how they react to different problems or things that are happening. And, you know, the more points of view you surround yourself with, the more you expand your thinking, your mind, your problem solving skills. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I'm really happy and excited to be your friend and even share those experiences when you're telling the stories and learn through you what that could be like. How did you get from going to Europe, coming to the States, to where you are today, your professional path?
Sure. Well, I went to high school here in Charlotte and went to Wofford College and graduated in 2008, which is the same year I started in brokerage, which was during the beginning of the recession. And there were not many people getting into real estate at that time, and even fewer companies were hiring. But I was determined that transactional real estate was what I wanted to do. So I began networking with anyone I could meet in the industry. I asked my family and friends for introductions. I asked those people for introductions. And eventually I met Aaron Ligon, who was working for Childress Real Estate at the time. And Aaron brought me on board. He taught me a bunch and was just an excellent mentor. And I worked on office, retail, industrial leasing. I got to work on some REO, bank-owned property sales. And one of the best things I did early on was begin working on my CCIM, the Certified Commercial Investment Member designation. And that helped me validate my commitment to the industry and hone my skills. So after 4 years at Childress and with the recession coming to an end, some of the larger real estate firms began looking for brokers, and Childress Klein had an opening in their newly formed brokerage services department. Childress Klein had always been at the top of my list, so I jumped at the opportunity to work with Scott Wilson and Paul Devine. And I was brought on to work as a tenant representative. And over my time, my scope of services and expertise has expanded. Part of what allowed me to expand my services was completing my master's of real estate at UNCC. UNCC was an excellent experience. I learned a lot, met some incredible people. But yeah, so anyway, I'm still active in the office and industrial tenant rep world, yet focus most of my time representing real estate developers and local investors. And that's my real passion, is development and investment side of the business, and specifically adaptive reuse.
Yeah. So, you know, this podcast is called The Power of Design because I want to learn from all the players that help create the built environment. Mm-hmm. You know, the architects, designers, they're thinking about the space, drawing, imagining things. You have the construction industry building these things. But you guys are on the front end creating these things from the very beginning. Help me understand, as a broker, what do you do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the closest analogy I can think of is either that of a quarterback or an orchestra conductor, which I realize are two completely different jobs, but they hold similar characteristics to brokerage. And I'll use the orchestra conductor analogy. So A good orchestra conductor needs to know how each instrument is played and what the instrument is supposed to sound like. The conductor does not need to be an expert on the trumpet, violin, or oboe, but the conductor needs to know how the instrument works in the overall symphony. So to bring that back to brokerage, a broker does not need to be an expert in Revit, AutoCAD, or foundation systems, but they better know at least a little bit about design and construction, and the same holds true with finance, law, IT, and then depending on what niche a broker is in, they'll need to know about rezonings, environmental issues, fire suppression, and so on. So a good broker should know a little bit about everything. And the orchestra conductor, just like a broker, also needs to keep everyone on time and in harmony. Time kills all deals. And a big part of my job is keeping everyone on track. And the other part of my job is to keep the team communicating. When a hiccup in a deal occurs, and hiccups always happen, the team must work together and quickly identify and resolving the issue. The other requirement of a broker is to be a master of local information. For example, knowing which tenants are moving where, which property owners are willing to sell and which are not, which developers are trying to tie up which properties, what are the sales comps, what are the lease comps in the area. Most of that information is not public, and that's one of the key differences between a good broker and a great broker, is how much private market information do they know. Out-of-town developers are hoping to build relationships with the broker who knows the lay of the land better than anyone. That information is learned from networking and building relationships, which leads us to a crucial key to being a great broker, being able to build deep, trusting relationships quickly. And the last skill I'll throw in is negotiations. Being able to understand psychology and how leverage is used is crucial. Now, I've always loved working on negotiating skills, discussing politics and philosophy. I was on the debate team in high school. I've played a lot of poker. I'm fascinated with the nuances of negotiations, from body language to cultural differences in negotiating styles. Yeah, it's all fascinating to me.
What do you think sets you apart from other brokers?
Well, I'm not sure this is necessarily a big difference, but I'm fascinated with the fundamentals of real estate development, the design, the construction process, the entitlement process, and how it's all interconnected. I of course enjoy the deals and the deal side of things. I'm somewhat of a deal junkie, and I'm certainly not discounting the relationships I've built, which have been awesome. But I've always had to work on the salesmanship side of the business, while the curiosity has always been natural. I'm kind of a real estate nerd, to be honest, and I'm constantly researching trends, asking questions, meeting experts. I love attending workshops, market updates. My favorite thing to read is the property report on Tuesdays in the Wall Street Journal. And so through my curiosity, I've become close friends with all sorts of experts, other brokers, bankers, environmental engineers, demolition specialists, contractors, architects, just like you. Mm-hmm. And becoming friends with these experts and being able to ask them for advice helps serve my clients. And of course, I work for a great company. The partners at Childress Klein have been excellent mentors. They provided a ton of invaluable advice and guidance, and there's no doubt that clients like working with me because I bring a ton of resources to the table. The last thing I'll say is I've got a well-rounded experience and a holistic view of the real estate process. I've worked with all sorts of tenants, buyers, and investors, industrial companies that store highly flammable liquids. I've helped developers buy contaminated properties. I'm working with multifamily and townhome developers. It runs the gamut. And working on such diverse deals allows me to understand how different aspects of the business overlap. And there is interconnection, and the skills do compound. So I guess ultimately I credit my curiosity as being the differentiator.
Based on your experience, what will be an advice that you'll give to a person starting a career as a broker today?
Master Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's the best book I've ever read.
Yeah.
Socialize as much as possible. Network constantly. Keep meeting new people. And to remember, from every person you meet, you can learn something. And the more different that person is from you, the more you can probably learn. Never burn bridges. Charlotte's a small town, and the real estate community is extremely tight. Guard your reputation at all costs. Drive different ways around town. Don't be a creature of habit. Take different ways home. Observe the properties around you. Look for patterns and change. And keep learning new skills. Get additional designations. Go back to school. Write handwritten cards. It's very impactful. Develop thick skin, because it's a brutally frustrating industry. When a deal dies, brush it off, learn from any mistakes, and move on to the next one. And the most important is to find mentors and get as close to them as possible. Surround yourself with the smartest and most successful people you can find, and before long, you'll adopt many of their skills and wisdom. You'll be forced to elevate your game.
Yeah, I love what you said, develop thick skin, because that's for sure applicable to any industry. Yeah. Business is not easy, when things they don't go your way. How do you handle frustration when you have worked very hard for a deal and all of a sudden, falls through?
Yeah, it's not easy. Just talk about it with your close friends, have a couple beers, and just try to forget about it. Again, it's crucial to remember the mistake. If you made any mistakes, you gotta recognize those so you don't make them again in the future. But you just got to brush it off. You can't worry about it. At the end of the day, it's just a deal. It's not that big of it's not a significant point in your life. It's just part of the process.
Yeah, and I guess as long as you're learning, it's still a win.
Exactly.
You're adding more tools to your toolbox, learning what not to do next time, or maybe not, who you don't want to do business with in the future.
That's a big lesson right there, yeah.
Yeah. What do you think is the biggest challenge your clients are facing today?
Well, you probably get this answer quite a bit, but construction pricing is the biggest issue, and it's not just materials. Finding labor and good employees has been a challenge across the board and has affected industries outside of construction, but it's particularly acute in construction. And multiple factors that have affected pricing, many of which are geopolitical, including tariffs and immigration law. But we're not going to get into politics.
No, please.
Another challenge is just simply competition. It's an extremely competitive marketplace. Just about every acquisition deal that I've worked on in the past year, even off-market deals, have had multiple bids, multiple investors circling. Charlotte's a hot market, but that does not make deals easy. And then specific to adaptive reuse properties, the environmental regulations and hurdles are significant. And since a majority of the work I do today involves old warehouses, many of which are contaminated, navigating the brownfield process is lengthy, laborious, and expensive. By definition, the brownfield process is basically getting the state to agree that the property is ready for redevelopment, which involves testing the conditions of soils, vapors, installing monitoring wells. The whole process is grueling, and experts tell me it's increased in complexity and strictness over the years. And some transactions I'm working on that would ordinarily take a few months to close have taken years to complete due to environmental issues and required approvals. But overall, I'm not complaining. The whole industry seems to be doing really well.
We'll be right back with more from the Power of Design podcast.
The Power of Design podcast is brought to you by OSA Studio, a multidisciplinary design firm focused on creating impactful experiences through the power of design. We partner with our clients to create buildings, interior spaces, brands, and strategies that help you deliver a successful project. As a minority-owned firm, we are committed to building a diverse platform of curious and driven design professionals so we can together pursue our full potential. For more information, please visit us at www.osastudio.com.
Henry, tell me more about adaptive reuse projects. What is that about, and what's your role in that process?
Sure. So adaptive reuse refers to the process of reusing an existing building for a purpose different than it was originally built or designed for. So most of my work has been, as I mentioned, finding former warehouses suitable for office and retail conversion. So I work with local developers who buy the buildings, take the property through rezoning, redesign the buildings, go through the construction process, and then release the property. And then depending on who the client is, sometimes my job is just to find the property, which is in itself a very difficult feat. And sometimes it's far more involved. Sometimes I'll be part of the due diligence process as well as the leasing process, where my job is to find the tenant. And ultimately, I'd like to be a developer, so getting my hands dirty and doing as much of the work as possible is ideal. So I view this as practice. Adaptive reuse is not a new phenomenon. It's been definitely in vogue and has picked up steam recently in the office, hotel, and residential sectors. And there's multiple reasons why it's popular with developers and public. There's the historical aspect. People love the nostalgia and appreciation for the older materials, craftsmanship, and aesthetic. And then people love the stories about the buildings and its occupants. Then there's the sustainability aspect. The recycling of buildings is almost always more environmentally friendly than building from scratch. And it's often more economically viable with cost savings in site work and building materials. Plus, there's the time value of money savings due to shorter construction timelines. And in many places like Charlotte, urbanization has pushed us towards these former industrial areas just by proximity to the urban cores. And those areas like South End and Noda, we've redeveloped those buildings into higher and better uses.
What are some of your favorite adaptive reuse projects?
Yeah. The Zeiss Museum of Contemporary Art in Cape Town, South Africa is probably the coolest building I've ever seen. It's a former grain silo, and they hollowed out the chambers of the silo to create an incredible cathedral-like atrium. It's unlike anything I've ever seen. The engineering behind it, it's just an absolute masterpiece. And now it's a high-end hotel and art museum. Pont City Market in Atlanta, former Sears warehouse and office building, Jamestown redeveloped the property, and it's just a masterful example of reusing materials and bringing buildings back to life. The scale and execution are outstanding, and if Atlanta can do something of this quality, so can Charlotte.
Sure.
And I'm really excited about several of Charlotte's projects. White Point's Optimus Hall, Atco's Camp North End, and everything Matt Browder and Brandon Brown are doing on Thrift Road and in that area. And I'm super lucky that I've had a chance to work with Matt and Brandon. Those guys are fantastic mentors.
So, Henry, we're living in a very exciting time for commercial real estate and development here in Charlotte. What are some of your predictions for the future of development?
Yeah. Well, when real estate folks talk about the future, you'll hear buzzwords and concepts like prop tech, big data, blockchain, 3D printing, driverless cars. And each of these areas will impact our industry. I love hearing folks like Elon Musk and Sam Harris talk about artificial intelligence. And I have zero doubt AI will transform our industry far more than we expect. And I think robotics and automation will affect everyone too, especially the construction industry. And I wonder what type of jobs people will take instead. There's a fantastic yet disconcerting documentary on the topic of automation called The Truth About Killer Robots. And it discusses the process of manufacturing jobs being eliminated by robotics, those workers then turning to service jobs, which are in the process of being reduced or eliminated by automation, even high-level jobs like attorneys. And then what? At a certain point, there's going to be more people than jobs. Do we turn to universal income? I have no idea, but it's interesting to think about. And as it relates to brokerage, I do think AI is going to eliminate many jobs, but I think there's always going to be a need for brokers, and the quality of those brokers will be higher. They'll be able to evaluate the mountains of data and provide guidance, because at the end of the day, someone needs to be able to determine what decisions are made, which buildings are going to be built. There's always going to be a human element to the development process, although the number of humans may be greatly diminished. And generally speaking, I do think there's a significant vulnerability to disruption in the brokerage industry. And I think that's one reason why the National Association of Realtors lobbies so heavily. The National Association of Realtors is the second largest lobbyist group in the U.S., much larger than the NRA. And much of what the realtors tries to do is influence the way tax breaks are structured, like mortgage interest deduction and the 1031 exchange, which both incentivize real estate transactions, which in turn creates commissionable events for brokers. The realtors does a good job protecting the brokerage industry, and I'm sure the realtors will be lobbying heavily to protect the industry from automation, artificial intelligence, and so on. And I don't think lobbying will ever end because it's protected by the First Amendment. But if somehow the realtors' ability to lobby become less effective, that could dramatically impede brokers' ability to conduct business. But enough about the politics. Back to Elon Musk. I've always been a car guy. I recently had a chance to drive one of those Teslas in autopilot mode, and it was blown away. It's amazing technology. And I'm aware regulations will stall the adoption of this driverless technology, but it's definitely coming. That plus ride sharing is changing our need for parking. It's going to be interesting to see how people retrofit old parking decks, and that's going to be a cool type of urban adaptive reuse all on its own. And it'll, increase the densification of cities. And just as cars are becoming more environmentally friendly, the same holds true with buildings. Green initiatives like LEED will morph into laws or building code. It's already happening. And it's possible that some investors will only buy buildings that have certain levels of green sustainability. So I think that business of retrofitting older buildings will continue to grow.
So Henry, I really appreciate how knowledgeable you are and how open-minded you are. We were discussing topics over 4 beers in the last years. Do you think the way you grew up and your heritage, all those experiences, shape the open mind you have today?
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about experiencing as many things as you can and meeting as different types of people as you can, and it just opens your mind. And the inverse is true as well. If you want to be closed-minded, don't do anything and don't meet anybody. So it's all about just getting out of your comfort zone.
Yep.
And I think that helps tremendously.
Do you think that gives you some sense of freedom?
Yeah, well, and when you talk about freedom, it really comes back to what I've heard you describe perhaps as the 4 pillars of freedom. And you should probably talk about it because I think about it all the time. I think it's really a powerful way to conduct one's life.
Sure. So what I'm trying to do with my business and with my life is to achieve freedom. So I define freedom in 4 areas. Freedom of time, which means I can do with my time whatever I want, not being confined to certain rules or somebody telling me how to use my time. Also freedom of money, which means I have enough money to get the things that I want, not being limited, but not having or having too much. Just, you don't think about it. The other one will be freedom of relationships, which is, you work and have fun and relate to the people you choose to be around with. I think that's very important. There are all kinds of people in the world, and sometimes you don't have the choice to select who do you want to work with or how. And the last one, which is the most important one, is the freedom of purpose. Feeling that what I'm doing with my job and with the things that I do in the world and really fulfilling my purpose in this world.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
Can you give us your perspective on design? I know you love architecture. You're knowledgeable about buildings, about architects, and being this podcast, The Power of Design. How does the power of design impact what you do and who you are?
Yeah. What it comes down to for me is well-designed buildings and beautiful architecture make me happy, and poorly designed buildings often offend me. And maybe that's too strong of a word, but it does upset me when land is dishonored by having poorly designed or non-functional buildings on it. I believe it detracts from society and adversely affects people's happiness. So in my role as a broker, as I'm orchestrating deals, I'm a very small part of the process of buildings being built. And the goal is to eventually make the decisions on which properties to develop, what those properties look like, and have an active role in designing buildings that enhance our community. And so to become a developer, as far as I can tell, you either have to have the equity, cash, or gain the trust of those with the equity. And I'm working hard to gain the trust of investors so that one day I can make the decisions so that I can develop quality buildings and ultimately leave the world a better and happier place through quality design. So there are 2 quotes I like about architecture. One was by Winston Churchill and the other by you. So Winston Churchill said, "We shape buildings, thereafter they shape us." And Jack Osa said, "Architecture is the human experience of space." And I like those quotes a lot. Feel free to expand on your quote.
Well, thank you for quoting me. First time that happened in my life. So yeah, I think architecture is the human experience of space. What I'm trying to say is when we create architecture, we're basically defining space, right? There is empty space and you create walls, roof, ceiling, doors, windows, and they start giving that abstract shape a form, right? But then that needs to be experienced by a human. And that experience is what the architecture is that human brain experiencing the lighting, the textures, the relationships, the functionality. I believe that if we design and build a beautiful building, put it somewhere in the world and no human goes there ever, that is not architecture. that is just a element in space. So yeah, I like to think about architecture as a human experience of space.
And how about adaptive reuse? Do you have any kind of thoughts on particularly cool buildings or projects you're excited about?
Yeah, so one of the most exciting things about adaptive reuse to me is the sustainability aspect, because there is nothing more sustainable than not to build more. So, there are many resources that they're already in place, might be the foundation, the structure, the building skin that you can reuse, and that's very positive for sustainability. And also the idea that when you're designing, you can think of a building that it could morph over time and have multiple uses. So it will serve that human experiences through flexible spaces. I think that a great building should be like that. Along the years, you could use it for many things, may have some repairs, things like that. And I appreciate personally when you see that contrast between old materials and newer materials when they come together.
It's very cool.
I think that's very exciting, because it kind of reminds you where we are today, but where we're coming from. And that's why, it's so popular today to see exposed brick and timber beams. Everybody loves that feeling. But I think it's just because it connects us to the past and also to the future.
It continues the story.
Yeah. So Henry, we know that in business, we have businesses and companies and names, but at the end of the day, we're doing business with people. How do you build relationships around the business?
So I think the most important concept is face-to-face interactions are vitally important to building trust and just conducting business in general. There's no substitute for it. Emails, phone calls, video conferencing, it just doesn't cut it. And to properly build a relationship, have a meal or do some sort of activity, whether you play golf or drink beers, some sort of camaraderie is the way to build trust and solidify a relationship. And back to your point about freedom of relationships, only work with great people. There's a saying, never work with a bad client, they only refer worse clients. And fortunately, all my current clients are awesome, and I've been lucky to work with mostly great people. But there's been a few times, mostly early on in my career, where I've worked with someone that I had a bad feeling about, try to work on the deal anyway, make some money, and it never ended up going well. And it's tough when you're starting out to say no, but just like in poker, the most impressive plays are the folds. As you're talking about business relationships and kind of how to conduct business, something that I found interesting is how business is conducted today versus 50 or 60 years ago or so. So in the 1950s and 60s, Trammell Crow developed over 12 million square feet of warehouses with a general contractor, McFadden and Miller, all on handshake deals alone. That is so far from how business is conducted today. Everything has contracts. And I wonder why that is. Here's some hypotheses. And I think the biggest reason are lawyers and insurance companies. The U.S. is a very litigious society. Lawyers are ready to sue at the drop of a hat. And I think part of that has to do with insurance companies and how they operate, but I think it has a lot to do with how attorneys are compensated. So in the American system, the loser does not pay for the prevailing party's attorney's fees, which encourages frivolous lawsuits. Another way of explaining it, in the British system and in many other countries, the loser has to pay for everyone's attorney's fees. So the plaintiff better be damn well sure they're going to win the case, and they'll hesitate to launch a frivolous lawsuit. Because, again, if they lose, they're paying for everyone's legal bill. So I think that's the main difference. But there's also, I think another reason why handshake deals have diminished is perhaps because of globalization. The business environment these days is far more diverse. The people coming to the table are from all sorts of walks of life, different belief systems, different views on ethics and business, some of these people, it might only be 5%, but they're bad actors. And they're able to travel more freely and run away from their transgressions. 50 years ago, it was a far more homogenous business climate. And while I think diversity is a net positive, I do think it's made it difficult for everyone to be on the same page as it relates to how to conduct business, which in turn has necessitated contracts. And the last one I think is possible is, retaliation has changed. Several hundred years ago, transgressions were often handled with duels to the death, at least for a minimum fist fight. One's word was their bond. And breach of contract is handled very differently today. So those are just some thoughts I have about how things have changed over the years.
Sure. Well, Henry, thank you so much for your time today. And I really appreciate your friendship, and I value who you are and what you do. You're very professional, and I look forward to stay in touch.
Thanks, Jack. You're the man.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Power of Design podcast. Remember to rate and review on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Find out more about Jack and OSA Studio at osastudio.com and follow us on Instagram at the Power of Design podcast. Thank you.